Hi, my name is Viva, and Senchu and I will be talking to you about reading and the brain today. So, first, what is reading? Reading is the process of interpreting letters or symbols either by sight or by touch. It's a multifaceted process that involves a lot of different sort of working components that are happening simultaneously. It involves word recognition, comprehension of what the word is, fluency, and of course, motivation, the want to actually read. So, let's get a little bit more into the components of reading. So, first, an important component is word recognition, or identifying the words, again, either in print or by touch. So here is something on the screen I can see as a string of letters that I recognize that look familiar, and I automatically know that this is a word. The next step is comprehension, or constructing an understanding of the word. Here, I can think back to the word on the previous slide, and I know that it's a citrus, it's a fruit, and I eat it. I sort of can associate meaning with what was previously just a string of letters. And the final important component is, of course, fluency. That is combining that word recognition and that comprehension so that output is fluid and cohesive. So I can say the word clementine. Again, this is a multifaceted process that involves sort of knowledge of sort of spelling and word production rules, right? Like I have to know that the T-I-N-E ending is pronounced tine. I have to know what it means, what it sounds like. So fluency is sort of the combination of all the different components and the actual output of the stimulus, which is clementine. So what are the brain areas that are relevant to reading? First, we have Broca's area. It was discovered by a surgeon, Paul Broca, in 1861, and it's a really vital component to language production. It's also located in the frontal part of the left hemisphere, so towards the front, specifically localized often in the left hemisphere. To get a little bit more into what exactly production is, so production is the actual output of a particular stimulus. It can either be spoken production, for example, I'm stating words right now, but I could also write something down, and that would be an example of written production. But it's going to be looking at something and sort of communicating it either verbally, orally, or written. The next area that I'm going to talk about is Wernicke's area. It was discovered by Paul Wernicke about 10 years after the identification of Broca's area, and it's really critical for language comprehension. It's also located in the left hemisphere, but more posterior to Broca's area, meaning closer to the back of the skull than Broca's area. And how is comprehension different from production, you might be wondering? So comprehension is more meaning oriented. So it's about understanding the word, not about producing it. So if I see a word like brain, sure, I can pronounce it brain, but do I know what it means? Do I know the context behind it? Do I sort of understand it as a term? That's where comprehension comes into play. And as you can see, both are pretty critical to reading. It's important not just to understand what's going on, but also to be able to verbalize it. The final area I want to talk about is the visual word form area. It's found in the left fusiform gyrus, and it was only relatively recently discovered. It's kind of a new brain area that we now associate with reading. Scientists did studies that basically took individuals and they showed them pictures of either shapes or letters, and they found increased activation in this visual word form area, or VWFA as I have abbreviated here, for the letters but not the shapes, showing that it sort of specially responds to letters rather than other stimuli. And because letters are so critical for that word recognition component of reading, this implicates the VWFA in reading. There's also different routes to reading. So two important routes that I'm going to talk about are the lexical route and the sublexical route. The lexical route is often used for familiar words that we've seen, we know, we were taught how to read, and it involves often sort of instantaneous knowledge of its phonological structure, or it's the structure of the letters in the word. So essentially, you can look at a word and sort of immediately know how to pronounce it. The sublexical route is a different route that's often used for unfamiliar words, like non-words. it's a more slower, methodical process of sounding out words. You might remember that when you were learning, or might still be learning new words in your vocabulary like we do every day, if you see a word you don't recognize, the approach is often to sound it out and use the knowledge from other words you may know about grammatical structure, about how letters might go together to predict how it sounds. So it's a little bit less immediate and takes a little bit more time and effort to sound out the words and use those grammatical rules. So here I have an example of a word that you can access often through the sublexical route if you know what it is. So you can see these letters on the screen, COFFEE, and you know it's coffee. You know how to pronounce this. You know that the double E ending is E. For a lot of individuals, they've seen this word so many times and internalized it that they don't need to sound it out as they read it. They can look at it and say coffee. This is in direct contrast with a word you might not recognize, like gloosh. That's definitely not a real word. It's a fake word, but you're gonna read it through your sublexical route rather than your lexical route. And what does that entail? Well, that entails being like, okay, I see a string of consonants followed by vowels, followed by more consonants. I know that OO sound often is the oo sound, like I know in other real words, like food or fool. Like I've seen that before, and I think it pronounces oo. And I've also seen the SH, and I know that usually is pronounced sh. And in my mind, I can combine all of those grammatical rules and suggest gloosh as a possible way to read this non-word. Of course, the actual sublexical route is a lot faster than what I just sort of verbalized. It happens in your brain, and it sometimes happens unconsciously, but that's sort of what your brain is trying to do. It's trying to use previous knowledge and integrate it with visual information to provide a possible solution of how to read this word.
So what about the actual roots of the words that we're reading? Words can be broken down into phonemes and morphemes. Phonemes are any of the perceptually distinct units of sound in a specified language that distinguish one word from another. For example, in English we have p, b, d, t, k, r, and other sounds. These can differ from language to language. Some languages use sounds that are more in the back of the throat, like Arabic, while others use a more limited set of sounds and focus more on tonal differences, like Mandarin. On the slide, on the left, we have English's phonemic inventory, which is a lot more filled out than Mandarin's on the right. And that's because Mandarin also has tones that are used to create meaning. And so it does not need as many sounds as English does to make up words that are really diverse in their meanings and applications and uses in daily life. Morphemes are the smallest meaningful unit in a language. A morpheme is not necessarily the same as a word. The main difference between a morpheme and a word is that a morpheme sometimes does not stand alone, but a word, by definition, always stands alone. So here we have one word, incoming, but in this one word, there are three distinct morphemes. The first morpheme is the prefix in. So the prefix in cannot stand alone, but it's a morpheme. Come is the second one, so that's a word and a morpheme, so that one can stand alone. Ing is a suffix, and it's also a morpheme that cannot stand alone. So each of these morphemes means something on its own, and put together, it creates another word that has a different meaning. So now that we know kind of the neural bases, the approaches towards reading, the phonemes and morphemes involved in reading, we can move on to how reading can actually help you. I'm sure you all have heard of the ways that reading enhances how well you do in school, but how does it do that? Reading can enhance your brain's connectivity. According to a study at Emory, when we read, the connections in the brain, especially the language reception areas, are greatly improved. And this greatly improved activity continues for several days following reading. And so the brain is physically rewiring itself as a result of you reading a book or reading a story or something like that. And this rewiring continues for several days after you read. So there's really a lasting effect of reading. It also expands your attention span. So taking the time to process a narrative, to think about the complex layers of a story, how they fit together, the characters. This actually increases the capacity for longer attention spans, especially in children. When we're using the internet, a lot of the times we're jumping from tab to tab, from thing to thing, scrolling really rapidly and processing things simultaneously. But reading forces you to take the time to process things, and that allows you to increase your attention span. Reading can also increase empathy. People who read literary fiction or stories that explore the inner lives of characters show a heightened ability to understand the feelings and beliefs of others. Reading can also build your vocabulary. Reading researchers as far as the 1960s have discussed the idea that the rich get richer and the poor get poorer, even when it comes to vocabularies. So what this means is that if you read a lot as a child, you start building this vocabulary, and as an adult, you're going to have a much larger vocabulary than those that do not read as children. So there's an effect that is the rich get richer and the poor get poorer, even when it comes to vocabulary. Reading as a child means that as an adult, you're going to be able to express your thoughts more eloquently using bigger words and more complex sentences than maybe your peers who did not read as much as children. And so that's really helpful even in the workplace to allow you to rise up, to get promotions, to give good speeches and presentations, and seem competent in your meetings. So reading has really lasting consequences throughout life because of its effects on empathy and its effects on your vocabulary. Reading can also help prevent age-related cognitive decline, which is super important. Elderly people who read more as children had better cognitive functioning as seniors, and people who read for 30 minutes even showed lower heart rates, blood pressures, and feeling of psychological distress. And these results were just as good as if you would have done yoga or listened to a funny comedy sketch for 30 minutes. So reading can not only help you be a more mentally present elderly person, it can also help you de-stress as you move through exams or finals or things like that. A 2013 study conducted by Rush University Medical Center also found that people who've engaged in mentally stimulating activities all their lives, like reading, were less likely to have tau tangles and plaques and other things that cause Alzheimer's and dementia in the elderly. So there are physical effects on your brain of reading that are super lasting. So over the course of this video, we've talked about what reading is, where it's located in the brain, what are morphemes and phonemes, and we've also talked about the many impacts that reading has on you that are super positive, not just now, but later in life, and not just in your academics, but also in your professional life as you move and grow older. So we hope that through this video, you've really been able to reflect on how reading is good for you.